Today we are going to talk about one of the important plays of Sartre. It's not much read or discussed in the contemporary times, but I think nevertheless it is very important. This play is called in English The Respectful Prostitute or The Respectable Prostitute. I think the English translation is not very accurate. The word French that he uses in a very, the play of words. The word in French is le putain, but he doesn't use that word as such. But he uses the letter P with 3 dots followed by that. In French, it is normally pronounced as P petit point. That sounds similar to putain. It has a kind of very negative connotation to that expression rather than the English word prostitute. Of course, the word respectueuse in French is translated as respectful. But I think Sartre is purposely using a word that he wants to point out to the fact how the society thinks of certain people as derogatory by the very word that he chooses to use, though he doesn't use the word itself, but uses something that sounds similar to the word. So, P, petit point. In French, P means P in English, the letter P. So, P, petit point means P followed by dots. Now, this is very important in the context of racism which he witnessed in the United States of America. Sartre was really shocked by seeing the amount of racism that existed in the States already in his time, and I don't think it is any different even today. Of course, the forms of racism may be very subtle, but nevertheless, the fact that racism is still alive in many parts of the world, and particularly in the United States, is very, very frightening. At least for Sartre, it was something that has to be addressed from the philosophical point of view. Sartre was someone who championed the cause of different sections of people, particularly people belonging to different race, and that explains why he has also written another play, a novel titled The Anti-Semite and the Jew. Again, it's a very interesting way in which how there is a certain stigma that is attached to the very identity, the Jewish identity, at the time when he lived. And I think it is not very different today. It may be very subtle, it may not be very explicit, but one can witness, it may not be necessarily with the Jews, but anybody from the Semitic background. There is a strong tendency of repulsion towards such people. Again, it has to do with one's identity as part of belonging to a particular race, a particular group of people. And the worst affected for Sartre are the blacks. And the whole play is revolving around this theme, how there has been a systemic violation of their human dignity in different aspects. Not only they are attacked physically, harmed physically, but how they are intimidated, how they are made to think that they are inferior, and how the justice system is often something that goes against them. Now, what is true of the United States in terms of race can also be true in our country, not necessarily in terms of race technically, but the color consciousness that people have. And even I would say the distinction that people have in terms of the higher and the lower, and the varnashrama that we practice, which is so much deeply, it has permeated into our being so powerfully that we are not able to think beyond these categories that we have made for ourselves. Now, let me give you briefly the outline of this play. This play is revolving around the young woman by name Lizzie. Now, Lizzie herself is a white woman, but unfortunately, she is someone who is engaged in, her profession is, she's a sex worker. So she was traveling one day in train from New York to somewhere in the southern part of the United States. And while she's innocently sitting in the train, she witnesses a drunken man, who's a white man, who ended up killing a Negro in the train, a black man in the train. Now, obviously this drunken white man belonged to a very high family with a lot of background, with political influence, and so on. So now Lizzie happened to be a witness of the murder. Now there is only one way in which they can squash that case is by trying to silence her. So one of the cousins of the murderer by name Fred. I mean, the play goes on elaborately with all the dialogues and the conversations, but the essential is Fred, one of the cousins of the murderer, visits Lizzie under the pretext of getting her service. And then he is very passionate, very romantic with her, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, after all that, nice time he made her have with him, he is telling her the real purpose of why he visited her. That is to request her not to witness against her cousin. Obviously, she is not impressed by that. She feels very bitter about it, and then she wants to go ahead with witnessing the murder. But again, she is intimidated by the police themselves in different ways. Again, that is, I mean, the play goes on by bringing out the different nasty behavior that the white supremacy can have, trying to hide the facts, trying to destroy the evidence by intimidating people who are powerless, who are weak. In this case, Lizzie is a powerless woman, and she doesn't have much of a social standing in the society. After all, the society has also certain stigma attached to her by the fact of her profession. But she's a woman. The whole point Sartre is trying to communicate is society may ascribe to you any kind of character which often assassinates your true character. But Lizzie comes across as a woman who is very honest and upright and a person with integrity, and that's a pity. And these are the people who are often ill-treated in the society just because they happen to be earning their livelihood with the means which others frown upon. So that purposely, I think Sartre has chosen a character to demonstrate the opposite of how we perceive people and how they really are. So Lizzie is the best example of what it means to be a good human being, though she is white, but in spite of the fact that she happens to be somebody who the society frowns upon, and she is the woman who is trying to take the path of justice, take the path of integrity, take the path of honesty. So she is the one who is authentic in her being. I remember this has to be understood in the context of Sartrean philosophy, which of course is influenced by Heidegger, as I told you. She is someone who is not in bad faith, whereas she takes responsibility for her life, for what she experiences, and she wants to be faithful to that. She wants to make the right choice in life, and she is not running away from making choice, and therefore she is not in bad faith. Whereas the other people who are trying to silence her, intimidate her, who have this a certain supremacy in themselves about what they are not really they are the ones who are in bad faith, because they don't exercise their freedom to choose what they need to do or what they think is the right thing to do. In fact, the whole idea in which Sartre connects the freedom has a lot to do with a certain existential morality. So it is not just a kind of a freedom which is merely something you celebrate, but also something that is a burden to you. You remember, it's a gift. Yes, freedom is a gift, but it is also a burden at the same time. It is also a curse in a certain way, because then the freedom that is given to you is also making a demand on you to be responsible and therefore to be authentic, to make the choices in life, which of course is something that you should realize that comes from your inner freedom, and that you are authentic about it. You are not hiding in the crowd. Finally, however, Lizzie has her own weak point. You see, the point is they couldn't intimidate her, they couldn't threaten her, but they could play with her emotion. So that's what finally they have succeeded. Fred's father was a senator, and he was a very influential man. Now, what he did was, he met her, obviously, Well, again, it's not that because he is very affectionate to her or something like that, but again, he is trying to influence her thought by playing an emotional card. So he is appealing to her by saying that how the murderous mother is going to be deeply affected by all these things. So he is evoking a very sentimental, emotional kind of appeal to her, which obviously she falls for because of the fact that she happens to be someone who is a wonderful person by her very nature, and she doesn't like to think of others' misery, and therefore she falls for that, and she is trapped. Finally, anyways, she realizes there are a lot of crude violence that unfolds after this, and then she realizes how they have been unjust, and then tries to help another Negro who was unjustly accused of in as much as she can. But however you are sincere, you are hard, she is not meeting with great success. Anyway, finally she is bought with a certain amount of emotional kind of acknowledgement. She doesn't fall for money or anything, but then she is someone who needs to be loved and cared for, and that kind of assurance is given by Fred and even by her father, and she accepts to be their permanent kind of mate, and that's how the play ends. It ends with a very melancholic tone, obviously. Sounds a little pessimistic, but what Sartre is trying to say is this is how society functions, and this is very painful. Now, this is the general plot of the play. Now, something that is interesting for us to notice is the whole question of the idea of racism. Now, in the whole play, Sartre discusses the question of racism, and as much as it discusses the question of anti-Semitism in the other play, which we are not discussing right now. Now, one of the problems that Sartre is trying to acknowledge in this play through the various characters that he is portraying, and trying to bring out the psychological dimension of the human consciousness. Now, some of you are majoring in psychology. For you, this may be helpful. Now, Sartre is not a psychologist himself in the proper sense of the term, but definitely from the existential point of view, through the existential lens, he is trying to look at the psyche. And how does he try to address this? So he says there is a petrified belief, there is a deep-seated belief that white represents what is morally good and black represents what is morally bad. This is something that we are all used to in our thinking. We think of angels in white, at least in the Western world, the angels in white and demons in black. So it is very deeply rooted in our subconsciousness. So the racist chooses to believe in an innate black inferiority. So the black is inferior, and it is innate to that very color. And this is also supported by the institutional bad faith. The institutional bad faith is an assertion that black person is a symbol of evil. So this he calls the institutional black faith. That's why shadows are bad. Someone who is morally not right is black. The language that we use, it's very interesting to see when you speak about a black spot, a black sheep. Now, all these things mean something negative, something bad. So the black man or the black person stands for the bad side of the moral character. You remember when I'm sometimes getting mixed up with the seminar group I discussed with Fanon, the idea of Fanon, how Fanon was deeply inspired by Sartre. And Fanon takes up this idea of Sartre and develops. Fanon is one of the African thinkers, and he is, from Martinique, French colony, and then he has read Sartre very well, and he is influenced by Sartre, and he has written a beautiful book, Black Skin and White Mass. It is a post-colonial literature. I don't know if some of you have done something on post-colonialism. You might have read it, but either way, this is black man stands for the bad side of the character. Throughout the play, the characters which are very who have this white supremacy, they try and affirm this time and again in different ways in defense of the murder of the young Negro. It's very, there is no way in which there is a regret, because after all, a black deserves to die. That's a kind of an idea in their dialogues that we can find there. There is also a paradox in this whole racist approach, because racist is clearly recognizing in some way the humanity of the black people, because only with regard to the human beings we can think of good or evil. So morality, properly speaking, belongs to the human person. It doesn't belong to anybody. So the fact that you immediately say somebody is bad, you are implying by that the person is human. But the irony is this, the paradox is this: the blacks are never treated like human. So on the one hand, by imputing certain moral character to them, which is always the bad side of the character, there is also a denial of their humanity. On the one hand, you deny their humanity. On the other hand, by making a moral distinction between the white as something that is morally good and the black as morally evil, you are also indirectly giving them the human status. The racist is not ignorant of the fact that the blacks are human beings. The racist merely tells himself about how human black people are in order to justify a superiority of white mediocrity. So it's not that the white people are ignorant about it. So the white people are constructing a certain narrative, and that is primarily to ensure themselves about their own superiority in spite of being mediocre. This is, the people who are powerful often have this tendency to justify their own mediocrity. They would consider themselves superior. Again, this has to do with a certain amount of psychology. The people who have a tremendous sense of superiority complex are primarily the ones who have not accepted themselves, who have not recognized themselves, who are not happy with what they are. They have a low self-esteem oftentimes. So there is a tremendous amount of mediocrity among these people who are racist, according to Sartre. That is why racism is a bad faith, and bad faith is an intentional choice by the racist. So Sartre wouldn't say this happens unconsciously. People are trying to hide their mediocrity in an unconscious or subconscious way, but it is a deliberate choice, and that is why it is bad faith. Of course, some others, like Freud and others, probably would attribute this to the unconscious, whereas Sartre wouldn't. Sartre really doesn't take this question of unconscious seriously. That is escaping your own choice, escaping your own freedom, and that itself is entering bad faith. Now, we may disagree with him on this point, but I think the deeper meaning that he is pointing towards us is that you and I have a choice in choosing to be what we are, or what we want to be. So we cannot really escape from that by hiding behind the theory of unconsciousness. So whether aware or not, the bad faith of the racist is a deliberate act to avoid the truth of the humanity of the black people. So it is a deliberate attempt. It is not something that they are doing unconsciously, and it is not something that they have in the subconscious. They are choosing to do so. It's deliberately done. And obviously you cannot say, even if they are ignorant about it because they are wrongly raised, wrongly educated, That is never an excuse for being a racist, especially when it comes to the fact of recognizing the black people as people with dignity. Interestingly, this what Sartre said many decades ago seems quite relevant today. We have heard about how today in US there is a polarity. We heard about the police shooting the black man just out of suspicion. And I mean, there are a lot of studies also that have shown how the justice system in the US has been very, very unfavorable to a particular community, obviously the black community, the Afro-Americans in the States. We hear a lot, we read a lot, we know that. Interestingly, I don't know if you have watched the debate between Trump and Biden the other day. I don't know if you did, if you watched it, and probably it is one of the, it was not a debate, it was just a personal attack, perhaps from both sides. But obviously, at one point in time, you might have noticed that Trump was asserting certain white supremacy, trying to even hide and ignore the fact that the greatest threat, according to their own, border security control data, the greatest threat to the United States security is the the people with white supremacy themselves, not others, not the immigrants, not people of color, not the blacks. That is their own national security data. But he tries to kind of cover that up and then tries to assert, saying that white supremacy is justified indirectly because all the other people are evil and therefore we need to fight them. The very discourse, sadly, this kind of discourse is gaining momentum, politically speaking, not only in the States, but in many parts of the world, and of course in India too. So if you watch around what is happening, certain narratives are getting emboldened and strengthened. And very sad, it has become something that we take for granted nowadays without even questioning it. Anyway, Sartre identifies a procedure of what he calls a negative generalization and stereotyping that is undertaken by the racists. And this stereotyping is exactly the same in the case of anti-Semites. So it is the same kind of stereotyping. In order for goodness to be a general trait, in the case of the anti-Semite, they localizes all the evil of the universe in the Jew. So also the racist would localize all the evil of the universe in the black. So the essence of the blacks is believed to be naturally negative and it cannot be changed. And so also the essence of the Semite is the Jew. The racist or the anti-Semite, according to Sartre, have succeeded in tracing out a monstrous portrait which is supposed to be that of a black or a Jew in general. So, both these places have a similar approach, whether it is a question of anti-Semitism or whether it is a question of depriving the blacks of their human dignity. It is the same approach. Whether it is a racist or anti-Semite approach, it is the same. White society determines black people as inferior. They are inferior because they are often considered as less evolved. So the blacks' submission to whites is justified in terms of this evolutionary sense. Herbert Spencer had this whole idea of this social evolution, which has serious problems. See, when you accept that theory very seriously, then it looks like there are some people who are more evolved than others, and if they are more evolved than others, then they obviously are justified in discriminating against others. A theory which has inherent problems. So Sartre is somehow trying to react to this kind of theory that seemed to be very commonly accepted by by the whites who claim themselves to be superior. So white superiority is, according to Sartre, is to prove that the Negro is in the lower status of the evolutionary ladder. So that is the reason why slaves can be treated like animals. I mean, slaves obviously referring to the blacks. They were the ones who were made slaves, and they can be treated like animals and even as property, as if they have no right to have a dignified existence on their own. So the whole idea is that somehow, in some sense, they are very primitive. So even when we speak about the freedom or the emancipation of the black from bondage, it is the blacks. It doesn't mean the blacks are closer to white. So even within that framework of the emancipation, well, you are not even then closer to me. So this is a kind of what you call a certain petrified value, something that is you consider to be a value and it is unchallenged, unchecked, and which is deeply rooted within your psyche. So blacks must be kept in their place. This is what the racists would say. After all, what is their place? Their place is, I mean, if at all you think of their place is that of the animal kingdom, and sometimes they don't have place at all. So this is the whole approach, that the white supremacists would have. So segregation, for example, in the south of the United States, have kept blacks from touching what was white. So Sartre observed in the United States, there is not one public place where one sees blacks and whites mixing together. Whether it is in theater, whether it is in restaurants, cinemas, libraries, swimming pools. Of course, things are different today, much better, obviously. Today it's more subtle than open. But at the time when Sartre visited, everything, wherever the whites were frequenting, those places were forbidden for blacks, you see. Very strangely, that exists even today. I mean, there may be slight changes here and there. The religion, both the whites and the blacks practiced, are predominantly Christianity. Even there, they have different churches. The churches for the blacks and the churches for the whites. The black church is, they will have only the blacks most of the time. There are slight modifications occasionally here and there. And the churches for the white, I mean, what kind of practice is that? Very strange. So even if we have the same faith, same religion, even so, you are not the same, and you cannot be together. And for centuries, obviously, the schools and the colleges were separate for the whites and the blacks. And of course, we know that there have been serious debate whether there should not be, everybody shouldn't be attending the same kind of college, and why this discrimination. We know that in the history, all right, in the question of civil rights and so on, which you are familiar with. Interestingly, if you are interested, there is a nice film, The Debaters, all right, The Great Debaters. You could watch that. It's one of the beautiful films I have noticed, where you get also some historical glimpse about this segregation, but it also powerfully challenges some of those ideas. It's worth watching if you have not watched it sometimes. I don't know whether it may be Netflix, I think. Otherwise, you may get probably in YouTube or some other channels. So Sartre was really shocked by this segregation. It doesn't mean in France everything was perfect. No, but at least it was not very acute to this extent as he witnessed in the United States. For Sartre, it was unbelievable to see this kind of segregation, and that is why. This is also, of course, the experience of Sartre's companion Simone de Beauvoir, right, in the streets of New York, and she also narrates a similar experience. So, in fact, it would be a scandal. It will be scandalous to see the blacks and the whites seen together on the streets at that time, obviously. So, racism in terms of bad faith considers black people as subhuman. Subhuman is probably a much polite way of saying. It's almost considering them as animals. So people who are not white, they are not worthy of receiving human treatment. Now, it's very strange. Now, this kind of discussion existed for many centuries. Well, that is quite one can somehow tolerate that if it had happened in the medieval times, and this kind of debate happened in the 15th century or 14th century. But this kind of understanding that happened in the 20th century, in the time when Sartre lived, it is unbelievable for the most part. But that is how people really thought of blacks, and they don't really deserve human treatment. They are not people. So the only honorable one, the white world is the only honorable world, and therefore the black man has to be banned from every participation into the white world. So, focusing all the evil in the world upon the representation of the black places the white races within the realm of what is good for society. So the white races protect society from all the possible fallouts because of the blacks, and they are trying to somehow withhold their white superiority, which alone helps them to keep the society intact, not to fall apart. Very strange kind of thinking. Now, it's very interesting to ask in India whether such kind of thinking exists. May not be in terms of racial color, but we have our own ways of thinking of what it is human. To me, what comes to my mind is the way that particular case in UP is handled, for the past few days. I'm deeply shocked, deeply disturbed, deeply saddened. It presupposes that that girl and that family doesn't deserve to be treated human. I mean, these are not the words that are said, but the way it is done, the way it is handled, precisely that kind of message that is being conveyed. And most of us are just silent about it because it doesn't matter to us. I'm deeply shocked and deeply outraged by this kind of attitude that is very prevalent in our society. We just don't have respect for humans, whoever that human is, however different that human person is from me. Very painful, right? I think we are deeply racist. Our racism is slightly very different from the racism in the United States, but I think Indians by and large are deeply racist, and I think that is something that we need to be worried about. That doesn't say anything good about us. So now the whole point is the racist chooses finally a good that is fixed once and for all beyond question. He dares not to examine it because examining would mean that he is challenged from another point of view. So a certain close-mindedness, certain existential blindness, certain denial of trying to see the reality beyond certain beliefs that you have or certain ways in which you have been made to think. And that is a serious problem for Sartre, because a society cannot progress from that way. Therefore, as a racist society as a whole ends up institutionalizing bad faith. So, and this is betrayed in all the beliefs and values that society has. So, that society would kind of claim a natural superiority of certain people over others. And it's exactly what the Indian society does as well. It claims that some people are superior naturally, not because they have achieved something individually on their own, not in those terms, but by birth. So Sartre's play, the respectful prostitute, is an excellent example of the belief in the superiority of whiteness as a social value. So the setting is obviously, as I told you, is in the southern part of America, where racism was running high in the time of Sartre, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, in the 1940s. So this whole narrative that that we have witnessed in that play. If you may read that later, how there is a whole way in which there is a systemic way in which justice is delayed, justice is kind of done away with, justice is denied, including the police. He brings out that very, very elegantly in that play. So, though Lizzie knows what is true, because it does not correspond to the institutional value of the Southern society, it doesn't seem to be true. So truth seems to be not something of factual experience, what has been witnessed. Truth seems to be something that has been constructed by a certain society, an institutional society, especially in this case, a society that institutionalizes bad faith. And only from within that bad faith, what you construct gets affirmed as truth. Again, very interesting to think about our Indian society, the narratives that we have, the claims that we make. What is truth seems to be what has been a repeated lie, affirmatively made, and somehow powerfully powerfully injected into the minds of the people. That suddenly becomes a truth, though our experience of truth can be very different. So the dominant white population finding the murderous story, they wouldn't accept that as true. So this is obviously the reason for their fervor is seen by the declaration in the play. A nigger has always done something wrong. A Negro has always done something wrong. So if he has been killed, there is something wrong with him. This is also true of, Sartre has not explicitly developed that particular idea, but definitely the fact that he chose that honest woman to be a woman, apparently, I think there is also a certain question of gender issue he is bringing in indirectly. But what is true of racism is also true of gender issue. You see, particularly in India, if you have a rape victim, the immediate way in which the society concludes is she must have invited that. She must have seduced him. She must have. Shame on us. We keep repeating this. Believe me, we keep repeating this. I don't know from where we get this, but this is a narrative that is very commonly, and sometimes even people in public office, they make such statements. I'm sure you have heard of that, and I'm sick and tired of hearing that. So it seems as though the victim is the one who is committed a crime. And our justice system is horrible. The victim never gets justice. The justice system always protects the victimizer and always further victimizes the victim. Now, this is very horrific in our society. And if you are a woman, obviously you would know that as first hand. It may not be in your own life, but by your relationship to other women. It's always the woman is at fault. So it's the same idea. Always the black is at fault. Very convenient way in which we would try to project this. Okay, I stop here. I have been talking too long. I will stop here and I will take up some questions, after which I will begin the lecture. Thank you.